Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to another episode of Five Influential Horror. Today, I am joined by Christina Wilder, who was here about a year ago. We talked VHS, the original. We did a review, which I actually thought this one was going to be on your list because you had such a connection to that film, and that was such a great conversation. But I'm excited about the ones that you picked. So, you want to talk a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am. Thanks for having me back on. But I am a horror writer. I'm also an actor. I've done some voice acting. I've also acted on screen, a couple of commercials, a couple of short films, and currently writing all kinds of different projects. But currently, my main focus is on a screenplay.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I think you were in the middle of filming something or had just finished wrapping and filming something the last time we recorded last year.
Yeah, that was a 24-hour film project.
Oh, that's right.
And it was a total blast, but I just was so exhausted afterwards
Yeah,
because it was 24 hours. So we were
it's
there
intense.
in the morning and we were there at night, and then we were going through reshoots and had makeup on us, and some of them were covered in blood because it was horror.
Sure.
And we got out late and I had to drive for it. So I just remember driving home being like, I need to find like a 24-hour fast food place because I need like chicken nuggets like now. Um, but man,
Yeah.
it was a total blast, and I love acting. It's one of my absolute favorite things to do. But
Yeah.
being in horror is just, I absolutely love, of course, love the genre. But you get to do a lot of really cool stuff that you wouldn't get to do in other acting projects with horror. You get to experience all kinds of different things, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I bet it was cool. We'll have to do maybe have you come back and talk like more specifically about like that kind of stuff because I would love to hear like how that is. I won't say what the project is just because there's it's going to be a while before it's announced. But I actually have somebody that I know that's a filmmaker that I have been in contact with just about early screeners to their movies and stuff, and they posted this like thing about needing like extras or whatever. They did casting calls for their next full, feature length film that they're doing. And I was like, I kind of have like, and they're not far from me. They're only like a couple of hours. So I reached out and I was like, so like, I can't act, but is there any chance you'd be open to like letting me help on set or like just because I would love like because it's found footage and I was like I'm like obsessed with found footage, like I would absolutely love to like be on set of one and see like what goes into making one. And so long story short, we went back and forth about it and he was like super open to it and was like, yeah, that'd be great, like you just let me know like what type of schedule you could do or whatever. And then we turned into this like how I had dabbled in like special effects, so I have like a trial or like I don't know what you'd call it, like a test run where I'm going to go the 1st of November to see if I can get the makeup to look like how they want. Cause I might end up doing that for it. We'll see. If not, he's still going to be totally open when we come in and help on set. But I'm like, I'm so excited because I'm so interested in like indie filmmaking and like what that looks like on the filmmaking side of it. So I'm really excited about it. It should be fun.
That's really cool. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So we'll
Makeup and
see.
horror, of course, that could be a whole other segment.
Oh
The
my God.
makeup and
True.
special effects, but makeup especially is just, but I have something to add to that in my list. So
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So you had, I think one of yours is actually on my influential list, which you can probably guess which one it is. But yeah, so we'll jump into your list. So your first one that you sent me was Nightmare on Elm Street.
yes. And that one came pretty quickly to me. That was literally the first one I listed.
Yeah.
And actually I've got like a Freddy Krueger shirt going
Oh,
on
that's
here.
cool.
Yeah.
Looks like a
Um,
comic book. I love it.
I'd absolutely love Freddy Krueger. I think he is, and this is saying a lot because her villains are so iconic. I mean, you go from
Sure.
Universal monsters to the
Hmm.
modern to even like the newer ones,
Hmm.
and just once you become an icon, it is just next world. You're immortal, basically.
Yeah.
But Freddy
Yeah.
Krueger is like the king, and I've called him the Eminem of horror villains because he has he takes such joy in what he's doing. He's having a
Yeah.
blast. He loves using puns. I usually hate puns, but when he
Yeah.
does them, they're good. So,
Yeah.
but he is, and of course, Robert England is just. I mean, he's one of those people. If I met him, I think I'd cry.
I know.
Um, I met Doug Bradley. I was honored to meet Doug Bradley, who's Pinhead, and I nearly
Yeah.
had a panic attack. He's like, "Just breathe," and I'm like, "I can't." But Nightmare on Elm Street, that, and I know some of this is because of the time of when I was born. I was born in 1980, so when
Okay.
you grow up and you grow up with certain things, it's going to influence you in certain ways. It's going to be more
Sure.
important to you than other things.
Sure.
Um, but certainly, I believe first one came out in '84, I believe,
Yeah, I think that's right.
and it was always just kind of there. And back then, before we had internet,
Mm.
there was sort of an organic word of mouth sort of thing
Yeah.
where you could, it was like there were certain rumors and everything had come almost like a romantic side of it where you didn't quite know what was real, but you heard rumors about Nightmare on Elm Street and that was based on a true story and could that
Yep.
really happen?
Yeah.
And I am an insomniac. I've always had trouble sleeping.
Hmm.
I don't sleep through the night. I think I can count on one hand the number of times in my life that I've slept through the night.
Oof. Yeah.
Um, so, and then also, when I do dream, my dreams are extraordinarily vivid, um, and I can recall every detail, and it feels so real to the point where it still affects me, even if I've woken up. And
Yeah.
there are dreams I've had recently, months ago, that it still affect me because it just felt a certain way.
So,
So
yeah.
the idea of a dream demon coming
Oh,
in when
yeah.
you're vulnerable and affecting
Yeah.
you not only in your dream but in real life, it just
Yeah.
was just such a tremendous, terrifying yet fascinating idea for me.
Yeah.
So that always just stayed with me. And of course, um, the movies as they've gone on have really kind of played with that. I do
Mhm.
have a soft spot for the third one,
Yeah, I love that
which
one.
is, I think everyone has kind of a soft
It's
spot
just a fun
for the
one.
third one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so creative. And then I had the video game for Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a lot of, I think it's seen a lot of franchising with it as well,
Mhm.
because I remember there's even like a rap with, I want to say the Fat Boys. I know I'm dating myself, with Freddie, like
Yeah.
Freddie's gonna get you. I think it's called. And I was listening to it in the car. My dad and I he was driving us back from visiting my grandma, and it was at night. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, oh, let's listen to it. And it ended up scaring me to the point where I asked him to turn it off.
Oh, no.
Um, but there is kind of that thing of like where you're kind of laughing about it, like, oh, isn't this funny? Isn't this fun? But then you start thinking about it, or the murders start happening, the deaths start happening, and it's like, okay, this is scary, or this is gross,
Yeah.
and this is weird and creepy and odd. And
Yeah.
it always kind of played, those movies always kind of played with it, like, is this person dreaming or is this real? And
Yeah.
it just has that an undertone that you just don't find in any other horror film or franchise. And I just think that they've really done such a good job with it. You're taking Wes Craven's vision
Yeah.
and just kind of adding to it to a point that feels legitimate. So, but yeah, that was definitely my first pick was Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I actually so up until like a couple months ago, I had only seen a couple of them. I had only seen the first one, Dream Warriors, and Freddy versus Jason, and I had seen the remake, but that was it. Like I'd never
Wow.
seen any of the other ones, and so I over the summer, I took a break from a couple of series and I wanted to do franchise lives on the weekends for the different franchises I've never discussed. And this was one of them. So I watched all of them finally for the first
Wow.
time. And I just watched, I watched them in order, even the ones, like Dream Warriors. I remember that one really well. I've seen that multiple times, but I rewatched it too. And I just watched them in order. And it's a good point because I think like it does they do get very like sometimes silly and funny and like they definitely lean into that comedic element a lot more as they go on, but you're right in that they don't really that doesn't mean that they've lost their sense of like causing fear in the
Mhm.
viewer. And there's these moments like in Dream Warriors specifically, like we get like a little bit of a fighting back, which I really liked. But the
Mhm.
second one, is very scary. Like I thought the second one, like the concept of the second one was really unique. It's a very different take on like a sort of almost like a possession kind of situation because he
Mhm.
comes in and he takes over. But I think like but yeah, the first one I'd always thought was really scary. And then thinking too like how the franchise shifts because in the first movie, it's a lot of character setup. It's not as much Freddy as we get, later where he's like constantly on camera, constantly in the scene or whatever. And I mean, it's always fun to talk to people who love this franchise because it hits different people for so many different reasons. And it's one that's like withstood time, like you said. I mean, he's maintained his status as an icon, and it's interesting to hear people talk about it like that because people still are just as connected to it as they were the first time they watched it.
And I think it's because there are a lot of horror villains that don't say much or don't even speak. Of course, first thing that comes to mind is Michael Myers, and then there's Ghostface, where they can sort of taunt their victims, but they don't speak. They don't verbally taunt them. Pinhead does, but he kind of does it in a way that almost matter of fact, um,
Sure.
of like, well, this is what's going to happen. Whereas Freddy just almost makes it feel like they're in on the joke, like the
Yeah.
banter. He enjoys the banter, but that makes the deaths just that more horrifying because it almost draws you into like, oh, this is safe, this is okay. And
Yeah.
there's some of the deaths that just haunt me. And I remember seeing, I think it was on Reddit, they're talking about the most terrifying deaths, and someone said Nightmare on Elm Street is always going to make the list because they're so creative and so disturbing.
They are.
First one that comes to mind is like the puppet when he was kind of being
Oh.
maneuvered, and it's like they're hard to watch. And then there was one that always
Mhm.
haunted me, and even now I struggle to even think about it, when he turns one of the girls into a bug.
Oh
And
yeah.
it is just like it just seems horrifying, and it's gross, and it's unsettling and terrifying because you think, there's nothing you can do, there's no escape,
With
and
no
it's
control. Yeah.
it's that horrifying death that you're experiencing in your dream, but you're also dying in real life. So it's
Yeah.
just that dichotomy, but he still is likable. It's weird because everyone's like, I love Freddy, he's the best. Oh yay, hooray. And I think I mentioned this maybe in the other um podcast, but um my husband and I went to Halloween Horror Nights, and they had a Nightmare on Elm Street themed haunted house,
Okay.
and we were staying in line, and they were playing the music, and I remember turning to my husband and I said, it feels like I'm visiting an old friend. Um,
Yeah.
because I grew up loving these movies and being terrified of them, but also just being fascinated by them and
Yeah.
just enjoying every aspect of them.
Yeah.
And it's one of those that if you're a horror fan, you understand it. If you're not, it's hard to explain, but it's like
True.
there's that the connection where it's like a fondness, but it's like, well, they're still terrifying. It's like I wouldn't want to
Sure.
mess with Freddy. I don't need Freddy anywhere near me. I'm good. But at the same time, he's awesome. So yeah, but that was definitely like an easy pick for me, was definitely Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So your second one was or is The Shining.
Yes. And this is funny because for the Shining,
Yeah.
uh, and I had this ritual when I don't remember how old I was. I want to say I was 15, but for months, it was for a summer. So at least 2 or 3 months, I watched
Mhm.
The Shining every night after my mom had gone to sleep. I would make myself a cup of cappuccino, and because I had like a mix thing, I remember I got like, I knew that was my ritual. I would sit and watch The Shining,
Yeah.
and I studied it. I studied it as a horror fan, as a Stephen King fan, as an actor, as someone who wanted to get into filmmaking, as a writer. And every time I would lose myself in it because it is just that next level of terror. I know that there's kind of this controversy that Stephen King saw it and he's like, well, that's not really what I was going for. I was kind of going
Yeah.
for something a little different, which is fine. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to kind of almost separate the novel
Yeah.
from the movie. The
Yeah.
reason that the movie does it for me is because obviously Kubrick is an absolute genius,
Yeah.
but the way that he uses space in it, and people have actually shown this, that if you try to look through, and they try to create those layouts of
Mhm.
famous places. Like they'll do like the Seinfeld apartment, that sort of thing.
Sure.
And they
Yeah.
said the Shining one doesn't make sense because he's going from this room to this room, but then if you look this way, it's the wall. So it's almost like it's impossible. So as soon as he goes in there, it's this otherworldly, almost like the
Mhm.
Fae,
Yeah.
where rules don't make sense. Now you're entering this other realm.
Yeah.
There's something else afoot, and just that helplessness as well. But I absolutely, I think it really kind of gives. It's obviously it's the metaphor of being kind of alone, facing your own demons, being alone in
Mhm.
your own mind.
Yeah.
But I also feel like the resurgence and the popularity of liminal spaces, like the back rooms, that sort of thing, is almost a nod to The Shining, or almost kind of in that same vein of
Yeah.
in a space that just feels wrong. And I've certainly felt that, and I think we all have, but just it doesn't feel right. And even just watching as a viewer, and you know it's a movie, but it just there's something about it. And then along with the music, it's kind of an attack on all your senses, but it's slow, and then it kind of holds you in its grasp as it's going on, and it just the way it ends is just like what just happened? Was that a fever dream? And it is just so um it's just so all encompassing, really.
Yeah.
Really,
And
really
it's
something.
interesting and a testament to what was put into it to make it feel that way, because if you don't know that, if you go in and you watch this and you don't, read about it, or you don't watch the documentary about it, or you don't talk to other people about it, it does feel wrong and you have no idea why as a viewer. Like you can't I've seen it a bunch of times. I really love The Shining. It's like one of few like horror movies that I think is just absolutely perfect. I don't have a single complaint about it.
Mhm,
But and it's even now, like it watching it now, it's just as unsettling and isolating and scary as it was the first time I ever saw it. And
mhm,
I'm really picky about like slower burns. They don't always work for me, but I think with the way that they do that space and all of that chaos that's kind of like encased in this space that we're staying in is like, even though you don't think about the fact that it doesn't make sense, you know that it isn't right, and it's even without
mhm.
any knowledge of it. So it's interesting how it can still work for a viewer without the viewer realizing why it's working.
Yeah, and it's kind of the things that you don't notice, and that almost like you're not meant to notice that.
Yeah.
And I've seen kind of a breakdown of it, of where you look at something from one angle, but then the next shot is a different angle. It's like, well, that's different. Like the carpet's
Mhm.
different, or the artwork on the background is different, or someone's clothes are different, and you don't even notice that as a viewer. But it's almost like your hind mind sees it and it's like something's wrong. This isn't right. And of
Yeah.
course, it's not a mistake because Kubrick was extremely detailed
Yeah.
as a filmmaker.
Mhm.
So this was on purpose to kind of throw us off as viewers and
Yeah.
just kind of let us know that reality almost doesn't exist in this dimension. And to add to the fact that it's hard to get to, the weather's terrible, and uh,
Yeah.
it's very much an isolation. Um,
Mhm.
and it's just I always you always used to joke. I used to work in a library, and there were a couple times that um, we looked like we were going to get snowed in. I said, "Well, I'm going to leave early because otherwise, if I'm stuck here by myself, it's going to turn into The Shining." And I was kind of half joking because if you're by yourself in a bigger area, it's kind of that almost that feeling of just the weight of it. And I know I'm kind of susceptible to that sort of thing, but
Yeah.
with The Shining, they're in this unusual place, and it has a history. I mean, he's told about it when he gets
Yep.
there,
Yep.
um, and it just unfolds. And the one scene that where he's walking around and it's empty, and then he walks into the ballroom and it's just brimming
Full
with
of people.
people, basically like a time travel, and it's so fascinating and so incredible, but it's also terrifying of he's truly there. I mean, it's really just that dimension is just that door's been opened,
Right.
and it really is just it's such an like I said, it's such an assault on the senses,
Yeah.
and there's no real escape from it because even if you were to manage to look away, the music is still there, and it builds, and it's just kind of letting you know, like, no, you're trapped, you're not safe. But
Yeah.
it's still somehow fun to watch. I don't know how it does that.
Yeah,
It's so
it
fascinating.
it is. I rewatch it all the time. Well, not all the time, at least once a year though. And it's funny because like so I've talked to, I think maybe one other person that had this on their list originally, and like their connection to it was so different. But it's just, it's like, I always say that like the Shining is like the standard for making you feel isolated, because I think even people who are more likely to maybe feel that way than other people, I think that it's still a really hard thing to accomplish, because you're in a theater, you're in the safety of your own home or whatever,
Mhm.
but to be able to pull us out of that comfort and genuinely make us feel like we are so alone and like no one can get to
Mhm.
us, like I think that that's like that fact alone, I think, makes The Shining such a great film, because like you feel it like right away, like as soon
Mhm.
as they get into the story, as soon as they're the only ones there, and after they do the walkthrough and all of that stuff, like you immediately feel like, all right, we're stuck here until whenever, like there's
Yes.
just something, it just works. And I don't think isolation is an easy thing to accomplish in a film, not for the viewer
Yeah.
anyway.
Most definitely, because even though I watched it by myself in the
Hmm.
dark, you definitely had that same feeling, watching
Hmm.
on the big screen and watching it with friends or with
Yeah.
loved one. Um,
Hmm.
it's just that you're almost like trapped within yourself watching it, and
Hmm.
it's really just, it's still terrifying. I remember I got to see on the big screen here. They showed it, and there were a few people in the audience who hadn't seen it, and we're thinking, "Oh, here we go." And there's still some jump scares where people were like, "Oh God!" and it's like, yeah, it gets you on all these levels. It has the slow burn, it has the creeping dread, it has the strange imagery, it has the sudden scares, it has
Hmm.
everything, and it just keeps pushing at you and pushing at you, almost like
Yeah.
it's testing you as an audience member. Like, how far can we push you? And it's just, but
Yeah.
it's just so exhilarating. It's really just fast, and you want to know more. Like, well, what else happened in this hotel? Why is it like this? What's going on? Is there a way out? Well, that sort of thing. And I got to see Doctor Sleep, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And when he goes back to the hotel, everyone in the audience, there was a collective groan, because we're like, oh gosh, we're never going to escape this hotel, are we? We're just like him. We're just like him. We're all stuck back at that hotel. We're never leaving. But
Yeah.
it's just definitely, it was definitely another easy add to the list for sure for
Yeah.
me.
And kind of talking about its impact on viewers, I think is actually like a super good segue into the third one you sent, which this is the one that's on my influential list, which you probably could have guessed that, but and that's the Blair Witch Project.
Yes, that's another case of growing up at a certain time.
Yeah.
Um, Being born in the 80s meant I was a teenager in the 90s. I was in my late teens, early adulthood in the 90s.
Yeah.
And the internet was still in its infancy. Social media
Hmm.
wasn't really a thing. There were AOL
Right.
chats, that's it. So
Yeah.
you're still relying on word of mouth. So there was an intense debate amongst myself and my friends and amongst everybody whether or
Yeah.
not this was real. Because they had the missing posters, there was limited information about it. They had the website, but it was all about the background about the Blair Witch and these filmmakers. And
Yeah.
it was such absolute genius guerrilla marketing, because they didn't let the actors really go out or do anything, so they wouldn't, so it seemed like
Yeah.
they were in fact missing. And found footage was not really a thing, so it just felt so real. And then when I got to see it, and another thing is that, and I think that's also, this is also another generational thing. I know that people still camp, but it's different now with
Oh
the
yeah.
internet and everything. So
Yeah.
I camped as a Girl Scout, and I camped with my
Okay.
family, and it was full on camping, like full
Right.
on, no electricity. You're out there in the woods. And of course, we would tell scary stories, because that's what you do. And even
Yeah.
though I was terrified, I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't sleep anyway. But um, the woods are just so terrifying as a place, because they have a certain feeling to them. There's
Hmm.
stories from way back. Of course, there's the grim fairy tales and such, but there's warnings about the fae. There's warnings about the unknown. There's a certain feeling to the woods that it almost doesn't feel real, and you almost get the sense that you're not quite welcome.
Hmm.
And I love, the nature and everything, but there's still a feeling of like, don't go too far into the woods. And but this felt so real. And then of course you're watching it, it felt real. And the fact is that you don't see anything, but when you hear like the children's laughter,
Ooh.
that's
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying. I
Yeah.
remember everyone in the audience was like, some people like got up and left, because it was just like,
Oh.
okay. And then, seeing the child's handprints, that was another thing too, or like, oh God. But I
Yeah.
think one of the scariest parts is when uh, the hearing one of them scream in the dark and they're missing, but you hear them scream, and
Yeah.
just your mind is just doing all sorts of things. And in the woods, sound travels differently. So
Hmm.
you feel surrounded, but at the same
Yeah.
time, it feels like it could be very close or it could be very far. You don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and it's clear they're not going to escape. And it just, the way that they're reacting, the way that they're interacting with each other, um, it feels so real, and it's just absolutely terrifying. And of course, it launched all these found footage movies. It launched its own franchise, and I think it's still considered the highest grossing movie of all time, because it didn't cost much to make it all. Of course, it made
Right.
all kinds of, it's still making money,
Yeah.
but it just was one of those two that even once you learned, like, okay, it's a movie, still it's
Yeah.
not too far off from reality, because there's the Bell Witch. There is the fact that, you know, there are stories about things that happen in the woods, murders in the woods.
Yeah.
You look at the what happened with West Memphis 3, and then,
Yep.
people being found in the woods, things happening, um, and even like the scene in The Witch, where there is the witch in the woods.
In the woods. Yeah.
So there's still that underlying fear. So people can kind of joke about it now, like, "Oh, don't go in there because the Blair Witch is there." It's like, well, there might be something there. So it still has it carries that fear for me,
Yeah.
where I enjoy it. I love watching it, but it's still like, okay, if I sit down and watch this, I'm just gonna be scared. It's just a fact. So, but it holds up, which is really impressive, because
Yeah.
it's been quite some time since it's come out.
Yeah. I think it's 25 is next year, or maybe the
Oh my
year.
gosh,
What year are we in?
I'm dating
2023.
myself.
Yeah.
I
I think
think
it's
so.
almost
I think
25.
so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's 25. It's 25th is coming up. And well, and I came into the Blair Witch thing a little bit late. So I was born in 88. So I was probably too young to have seen it when it first came out. But what I watched it for the first time in 2009. And at that time, as for me, as far as horror, I really was only seeing like the mainstream stuff, like the stuff that I got to see with like my sisters when my parents weren't around, or and I knew that I had an interest there, but my knowledge base for horror wasn't super big yet. And I watched this I by myself. And at the time that I watched it, I had just moved out of my parents' house because I was, how old was I, like 19, almost 20 or something like that. And I just moved out of my parents' house, and I had a roommate, but my roommate, I don't know, wasn't home, but we literally lived in a house in the middle of the woods in like a super small town. And at the time, by the time that, 2009 came around, everyone knew that this was just a film. There weren't really any questions about it anymore. And it was more just a fascination with it and their marketing and all the things that they went into making it so believable and so different from anything that we'd experienced before, as viewers. But it didn't matter. Like, because I remember watching it again completely by myself, and I hadn't been living on my own very long either, which I think is also like its own scary thing. And so and like I literally live in the middle of the woods, and I was like, I don't know why I thought it was it absolutely terrified me. I was so uncomfortable. I paused it a couple of times to like breathe in. I had to turn my lights on. Like, it got to me really bad because, like, and this kind of goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about with The Shining. Like, this is like when they get to that part where he's like talking about throwing out the map and they're like super lost. There is like so much, I'm filled every time that scene happens with so much dread of like, well, what are we going to do now? Because like, there's no other way to get out. There's no other way to get home. We don't know where we're
Mhm.
going. Like, all this weird stuff is happening. Like, what do we do with this? And I'm feeling all these emotions with these characters, which again still happens as I watch it even now, where I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm angry, I'm scared, like I feel everything. And I always tell people when I talk about it, it's crazy because nothing happens in the Blair Witch. Like, you literally could take a camera and essentially and go out and redo these scenes. Anybody could do them, but that's not really what made the movie what it was. But the fact that like it's so simple in concept and it worked so well, and people are still dissecting it, still talking about it, still writing books about it. It's just like, I think it stands as not only an influential horror for us, but like for horror and for the subgenre of found footage. Because there's there's a couple of found footage movies. Cannibal Holocaust is technically a found footage film. And then what's the other? The McPherson tape came out in like the 80s. It's ridiculously silly, but that came out a long time ago. That one's about aliens. But this really set the tone for everything that came after. I mean, there's so many found footage films that are essentially a similar concept. Oh, we're going into the woods to look for something, and we like, like there's camping ones. Like it's a really common thing, and it all comes from the influence that the Blair Witch had on these filmmakers getting into found footage.
I think too, what helps make it work is the camera work, because when
Yeah.
they say what was that, the camera just abruptly moves like as if you were turning your head, so
Yeah.
you're there with them. And
True.
it's so, because that's the same sort of thing whenever, like, if you're somewhere or wherever, you're like, wait, what was that? Yeah, the camera moves like you're right there
Yeah.
experiencing it with them.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
way that a camera looks around, like, wait, what's okay, is that something? No, okay,
Yeah.
wait, did you hear that? And then like the sound kind of fades in a bit. It feels real, because it's like, it's
Yeah.
not just like, oh, the sound's coming like right over there. It's like, no, you hear something and then you strain and then it's quiet and then you hear it again and you're like, wait, that's a child laughing. Why is there a child laughing in the middle of the woods? It's like,
Ooh.
nope, nope, nope. It's that whole thing of like, okay, nope. And then they run. It's like, yeah, I would probably run too. And then they're panicking, and yeah, you feel it with them. And even though I've seen it a million times, you know
Yeah.
exactly what's gonna happen. You still feel that, oh god, okay, nope, not good. And the fact that, the movies that I chose are the movies that I still feel, even though I've seen it, I know how it ends. You still
Yeah.
go through all that with the characters. And with the Blair Witch, it just takes it to that next level, because it doesn't feel like you're watching a movie. It's not like, oh, I'm watching this movie. It's like, no, you're there in the woods with them.
You're a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you're lost. So,
Totally agree. Yeah.
oh
And
gosh, it's scary.
I agree, and I think it's one of the reasons I think my standard for like I always say this a lot, especially when we're talking found footage or like monster movies or demon things. There's something to be said about not showing everything, right? Because that's what this does that's so effective, I think, is that like we don't know where anything is. We don't know what anything really looks like. We get the couple of people in the town that say, oh, like they say, oh, she's covered with hair. There's all these different things. But we don't know because we never get to see it. And there's something like so unsettling about that. Like, in the end, when we get that final shot of the corner and like everything, like
Yeah.
that is one of the most effective, scary moments in a film I
Mhm.
think I've ever seen because
Yes.
no, we don't like nothing happens to him. Like as far as we can see, we just
Yeah.
hear, Heather screams or whatever, the camera drops. That's the end of the film. But
Yeah.
there's so many movies that they want to show you everything. They want to put all their
Mhm.
cards in front of you, and then it ends up not working as well because there's something about the unknown. Same with being in the woods. It's like there's something about it that just feels uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
this is like the perfect example of that because we see the hands on the tent, we see the little, the stick things, like we get all these things, but we never see what's actually doing it. And that's like,
Mhm.
to me, that's like super scary.
Absolutely. I always like too the fact that the different descriptions of the witch
Yeah.
felt real, because it felt real, because when you read about cryptids, which is
Yeah.
very interesting,
Hmm.
those descriptions vary. Like, there's descriptions of Loch Ness where it has hooves. There's
Hmm.
descriptions of Loch Ness where it's like, no, it's got like these big old gills, and this I'm like,
Yep.
no, it's got like a smooth neck. So it kind of goes into that, where it's been proven that eyewitnesses can, their testimonies can vary, because
Yeah.
they can be like, no, 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 he was wearing a red shirt, and then they'll
Yeah.
show a picture like he was wearing a green shirt. They're like, I had in my head he was wearing a red shirt. So
Yeah.
it's your mind's eye, the way that you interpret it, and then you're drawing on your own histories. Like, I know I'm drawing on my own fears when I was camping as a child,
Sure.
and I'm surrounded by the woods, and it's like, okay, grown-ups are here, but if like the hook man comes to get me, then they're not going to save me. There's
That's not
nothing
going to
going to save
matter.
me from. And then it's a malevolent spirit, so
Yeah.
even if it's not, it's made pretty clear it's not human,
Yeah.
the witch or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there's that whole thing too of like, well, how are you going to protect yourself against it? And it's made pretty clear you can't, or it's too late. Because once you're in the woods, once you're in her realm,
Yeah.
that's it. She's kind of
Yeah.
playing with you and kind of luring you.
Hmm.
Again, that grim fairy tales, luring them back to the witch's cottage.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, we could do a whole thing about talk about a conversation about grim fairy tales and how terrifying those are.
Sure.
But it kind of goes back into everyone's childhood because everyone knows those
Yeah.
stories of,
Yeah.
stay away from the witch's cottage.
Yep.
And here they are in the witch's cottage, and they're not alone. And there have been people or children before them, and just the descriptions of what happened with Rustin Parr and everything, and all those
Yeah.
other people, and it's just
Yeah.
it just adds to that, the whole mythology of it, which I think, and the fact that it's built from then, and it's still building, is really, really cool and really fun to watch as an audience member. I
Yeah.
think they can do so much more with it too. It's endless opportunities for it. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Blair Witch is like one of my most influential because I genuinely think it really just shaped so much of how I view horror and the way that I go into it. And it's like you said about the ones that you picked, like I still think about it. Like when you were talking about the laughter, I literally got like goosebumps. I was like, oh,
hmm,
like
yep,
and I don't know, like there's a handful of movies, that can do that, but I think considering how old this one is, like it, and
yeah,
especially considering how much the subgenre has changed, and for
hmm,
it to still just hold up just as well as it did, I mean, it's impressive. I think it's a testament to the filmmaking. I think the improv parts, the things that the poor people had to go through to like make this movie, I think is it just makes it's one of the reasons it feels so real and so genuine.
definitely. And then of course, I mean, I have a fascination with missing persons and people who
Okay.
that sort of thing. So that adds to it too. That
Mm,
whole idea of missing people and like what will happen with them.
yeah.
Um, so that adds to it. That whole
Yeah.
like, here's some footage of people who are missing. We don't know what happened with them. They're completely gone. And then I think, because I had one of those accompanying books of, oh, they found the camera, they found Heather's journals, um, but they
Oh,
were
right.
buried, and they never found any trace of them. It's like, what the heck happened with them? So that sort of thing just adds to that mystique. That's also happens in real life. There are missing people. So it's just adds that level of discomfort.
Yeah. No,
Definitely.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
All right. So this is switching gears a bit, but your number 4 is Child's Play.
Child's Play. So this one, um, is one of those, and it's. I love that you put up the poster because I saw the poster and an advertisement for it as a child.
Yeah.
It came out in the early '80s. I was a kid,
Yeah.
and I remember seeing something about the interview with the director, who
Hmm.
said that or the screenwriter rather, and he said he wanted to make a film about how advertising affects children. And it's funny he says that because I feel like my generation came up with watching MTV,
Yeah.
and there was all these things that sometimes some things we saw almost accidentally,
Hmm.
because if we were latchkey kids, or if the parents weren't in the room, or if they stepped away for a moment, then it's like, what's that? And it's like, oh, you get a dose of reality. So, because we didn't really necessarily have the internet, or the
Yeah.
internet exists now, of course.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so for Child's Play, I saw the trailer and the poster as a child, and I am not exaggerating when I say ever since then I have a fear of dolls. Dolls
Yeah.
terrify me.
Yeah.
And my mother had a collection of dolls.
Hmm.
And oh my gosh, it just messed me up to the point where I
Ah,
would like slowly approach them, and I would look in those beady glass eyes, like Jaws says, like a doll's eyes. And I would be like, I know your secret. And it's just the idea of an
aw.
inanimate object moving is terrifying. So possessed dolls scare the heck out of me. And there was one time I remember I was staying with my dad in my old room, and I had dolls as a kid,
Hmm.
before this, obviously. And then
Hmm.
I had like a space. It was like a little like mini closet, but it was like above like my dresser,
Okay.
stuffed full with toys. Um, and I was just kind of reading, or I don't know what I was listening to music, I was reading,
Mhm.
and then out of nowhere, one of the dolls fell, and I froze. And I remember being in such terror that I couldn't move. And I remember thinking, if that doll starts to move towards me, I won't be able to move. I mean, I was in such terror.
Yeah.
And I was eventually, obviously, able to move. but I remember like blasting like MC Hammer, like I'm gonna rock this away, like I'm gonna scare it with my music or something. But I still remember that feeling of just being terrified. And
Yeah.
when I finally saw the film,
Hmm.
there it Chucky is another one of those where he's charismatic and kind of silly. And of course, the franchise has done a lot of different things
Yeah.
with the character, but it's terrifying. And there's one particular scene that I think is one of the scariest in horror films. When, and I think everyone knows it, when she's like looking at the doll and she's kind of looking it over, and then she lifts the back, sees there's no batteries. Then all of a
Hmm.
sudden his head turns, "Hi, I'm Jackie, you want to play?" And she screams. And every time I've seen it, I jump and I know it's coming, because Chucky is scary. And I
Yeah.
think it's the fact that he has no morals. He was this horrible serial killer person who's played by Dad Brad Dourif, who is just a phenomenal
Yeah. Totally
actor.
agree. Yeah.
And but he almost gets pushed to this next level by doing this black magic, this dark magic, to become immortal. And now he's even more evil, and he has these powers. And then like the way that the doll changes, its expression changes. It's almost becoming human. Just adds that level of,
Hmm.
and just like the idea of this doll being something like something you trust as a child, something you love, something that gives you comfort, like your friend,
Hmm.
your buddy, good guy. And it's not to be trusted.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of layers to that, but it's almost that whole, that this poor kid is forced to grow up very quickly because of all this horrific things happening around him. But I think it's a very clever take on, a child's trust,
Yeah.
and it being turned into something malevolent, and the idea of evil being able to exist in all different kinds of forms.
Yeah.
But it's really just it's really a fascinating and pretty cool concept. It's really neat, but it is also really terrifying. And just even at the end, when they think it's finally over and this mangled burnt doll is stalking him, and it's like, oh, it's a doll, you just kick him away. It's like, yeah, but it's also like it can scurry, and it can jump, and it can do things. It's like,
Can
so
hide
yeah,
really
exactly. So it's like,
easily.
that's
Like,
terrifying.
yeah.
I mean, I have a cat, and she will sometimes like to sneak up on me. I'm
Oh my
easily
God.
startled too, but like I'll be turning around and all of a sudden meow, and I was like, ah. But it's just like, okay, well, if that was Chucky, I'd be gone. So like he'd
Fair
find
enough.
a way, like, oh, I'm gonna stab you. But
Yeah.
there's something about dolls that still scares me. Um, where it's an immediate nope from me. So, but thankfully, there's no dolls around here or anything like that. But like even just like little like a like and this is kind of sad, but sad to see the passing of Pee Wee Herman. But I had the Pee Wee
Right.
Herman doll that could talk, but the thing
Oh.
looked really freaky and weird. The doll was kind of scary looking, and my dad used to keep it in the basement. And then I remember one time we were down there cleaning stuff up, and we both looked at it, and my dad said, that thing is terrifying. And I was like, it's like, how much of that is from Child's Play? I mean, of course, it's not the first evil doll. There's
Right.
Talking Tina, which is one of the absolute best um, Twilight Zone episodes, which is saying something.
Yeah.
Um, but the idea of a talking malevolent doll, murderous doll, is not new. But I think Child's Play just introduced it to modern generations, in a way
Yeah.
that still haunts us. Because look at how popular it still is. There's still, the franchise is still going. There's the TV show, there's the
Hmm.
remake. People are talking about sequels.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Chucky is just, he's a cool villain. There's no escaping that. So yeah.
Yeah. I actually I put off the show for a while. Not for any reason other than shows are just their time suck and I don't have a lot of time. So I usually have to spend it
Exactly.
watching movies and things. I don't really get a lot of shows to watch. So I started season 1 about a couple months ago and
Mhm.
I'm finally caught up. So I got through season 1 and season 2 because season 2 came out on Peacock like September 4th. So I finally
Mhm.
was able to see season 2. And I like I'm not like a massive Chucky fan, but I really do like the movies, all of them. I even like
Mhm.
Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky has its place, Curse of Chucky, Cult of, like I like all of them. And the show really has been no different. And it's, it's another one that definitely got a little more silly and over the top as it went on, but I think it works for what it is. And I really, really like the show. It got a little, there's a couple episodes in season 2 that I was kind of like, this is, they need to get back on track. There's a couple like episodes that were very bizarre, but then it got back on track and it was fine. But I really like that it's continuing because I do think it has a play. People really love this franchise. And there were a lot of people, that were not super happy about the remake, which I thought the remake was fun. I didn't hate it. But there's a lot of people that had strong feelings, and then it's people that are like really enjoying the show. So it's crazy to see it still going after all this time and with new things. Like the show is completely new. Like, and we're still getting new information about Charles Lee Ray and Tiffany and all this. And it's interesting that it's still going as strongly as it is given its age.
Definitely. And then I actually haven't seen the remake yet, which kind of surprised me because my husband is kind of interested in watching it, but he also is like madly in love with Aubrey Plaza, which is fine because, hey, I think she's awesome too. But
Yeah,
I think because when you grow up with certain franchises,
it's hard.
particularly, you can be a little protective of it, and sometimes to the detriment because it's like, well, let's introduce it to another audience. There's these new generations now, and you can come maybe play with it.
Of course.
But of course, the original 9 times out of 10 is just better. Is just how it is. But
Hmm.
also the fact that the practical effects on Chucky were just so well done, like his expressions and the way his face twists, and just it it's another one of those that it feels real, it feels organic, because it's certainly one that you would have to suspend your disbelief for, like, okay, so
Yeah.
he's able to do this magic spell
Mhm.
and he's able to do this and this all happen and then this just kind of happens. It's like,
Yeah.
well, but it feels real as you're watching it. Like, yeah, there's a doll just wandering around and murdering people because he can.
Yeah.
And just what, but I like the way it builds up to it, where um, the mom like will walk out, and then the doll is sitting and watching the news show about
Mhm.
Charles Lee Ray. It's like, why is the doll out here? And then she like asks her son, why did you put the doll out there? And he's like, I didn't. He must have just gone out by himself. And she's like, no, don't. I know you're being a kid. And he's like, no, I did
Yeah.
not. I did not put him out there. He walked out by himself. And so
Yeah.
you're almost watching, and as the audience member, but you're almost learning with the mom, there's something not quite right with this doll. This doll seems odd. And so when she discovers, and when he finally kind of comes to life and attacks her, and you think, oh, it's just a doll, you can overpower him. It's like, well, can you? Because obviously the doll is strong because it's got a human spirit in it.
Yep.
And then you're talking about magic, and then it's also,
Mhm.
it just, there's that evil with the power of evil with it that just seems like it's another one of those that you can't quite escape it as easily as you think you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, it still holds up, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is the practical stuff. I remember watching, I don't know where I saw this. I'm trying to remember. There's an interview, it was a clip of an interview with, is it Tom Holland who did the Tom, is that his name?
I don't remember.
I think it
I
is
don't remember her
Tom.
name.
I always say Tom Holland, but then I think of the guy from Avengers and I start second
Yeah, I think
guessing myself.
Tom Holland is this Spider-Man.
Yeah. So what's the other guy's name? It's got to be close to that. Am I crazy?
Mm, I don't have
No,
names, but I think I know who you mean.
I'm right. It's Tom Holland, the guy that
Okay.
did Fright Night. I thought he did do Child's Play. Okay, I'm not crazy.
Okay.
Either way, I watched
Yeah.
an interview where he's talking about that scene when the mom learns the truth and she's, oh my god, and she drops the doll and the doll rolls under the couch, and him talking about how difficult it was to get that stupid doll to roll under the couch like that. And they had a lot of hiccups and things like that, trying to make it work, trying to make it look
Mhm.
realistic, to get the things moving that they wanted to get them to move. And so that was one of those things where they had to reshoot because it would go like a little bit and then it would stop moving, or it wouldn't quite go as far. And it was like they finally ended up putting something under the carpet or whatever to make it so it was literally at an angle. So the doll would then roll under but they went through a lot to make this look realistic. And I think it was time well spent, because that's one of the reasons
Mhm.
it holds up so well now, is because it's all
Definitely.
practical. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So your number 5 is The Exorcist.
Yep. The Exorcist, I'm sure is probably on a lot of people's list. And it's another one of those that I think people have on their list for a lot of personal reasons because, of course, it's got the religious connotations for it. This is another one of those movies that I watched every day for summer. However, I was in my older teens.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have, I don't know if I still have it, but I have the original book by William Peter Blatty, which I read, and it's just another fascinating book because you're reading it like, wow, it's just such an incredible story because
Yeah.
it's the idea of it is the loss. Not only is it that you're powerless, but you have no power within your own body.
Yeah.
Um, is another level.
Mhm.
Because okay, being lost in a haunted hotel or the woods, you still have your own control of your own self. Whereas with the Exorcist, she's very
Yeah.
much a hostage within herself
Yeah.
against probably the one of the biggest examples of evil there could possibly be is a demon. Um,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating because you never quite learn the whole story. I know that there's been sequels. I've seen most of the second one. The third one is actually quite excellent. So if people haven't
I
seen
love the
Exorcist
third one.
3, and it has one of the biggest jump scares I've ever had in my life.
Yes.
Everyone knows
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't,
Yeah.
um, don't have any hot drinks near you while you watch the movie because it just
Yeah.
happens and you're like, ah. But
Yeah.
yeah, so but it's really fascinating and just the mystery of it, like why is it called itself Captain Howdy? And just the little things like again the practical effects where the mom goes to play the Ouija board with her daughter and the planchette moves away. Like no, and it's like what is this and why is and then this is a child of divorce, which I myself am and I think a lot of people are, and if
Yeah.
you are not a child divorced and someone's been divorced, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And just kind of she's in that weird crossroads where she's a young woman and she's staying with her mom and there's all these like feelings around her and she's going through puberty, so of course
Mhm.
there's all those metaphors for that. And
Yeah.
you have the priest who's kind of doubting himself. He's going through his own tragedy. He's feeling guilt. So there's a lot of layers to it. And then this idea of an evil being older than humanity, like when it opens in the desert and they're
Oh.
finding these tokens, and
Mhm.
Marin's looking at it, and then the
Yeah.
clock stops. Just different things of like an idea of evil, just always almost reminding humanity that it's been there and it's going to be there. For
Yeah.
me, I grew up Catholic.
Okay.
I remember it. I mean, I went to, I had communion. I remember going to church and, you hear the Latin being chanted and doing the whole thing. I still remember a lot of the prayers. Um, so there was a lot of ritualistic things in Catholicism, a lot for a lot of religions, but in Catholicism, it's extraordinarily heavy on rituals and talismans and that sort of thing. My
Mhm.
grandmother on my father's side, extraordinarily Italian Catholic grandmother. So she had like the palms for Palm Sunday. She
Mhm.
had pictures of the Pope, framed pictures
Mhm.
of Jesus in various stages, either of torment or with the open heart, and just so I just to me, I'm used to that sort of religious imagery.
Yeah.
I myself am agnostic right now. I am not religious at all. Um, so there is that added feel, that added layer of
Yeah.
religion betraying you or your love of God, of whatever that is, betraying you. It's not enough. Um, and then, of course, there you can add to that of like, well, there's also, of course, the real world of examples of the church betraying humanity in various levels. So it really just kind of works on all those things. But at the core of it, it's this poor girl being tormented, and the
Mhm.
scenes are horrific and they're hard to watch. And just they're so it's heartbreaking too, because you have the mother's anguish of watching her child
Oh,
go through this, and there's nothing she can do, and you feel. And Ellen Burstyn is extraordinary. I mean, my God, her talent is
I
just
agree.
incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you feel it with her. And it's like, I don't have any children, but you feel this agony with her of like, she's like frustrated. She's like, and she to the point where she's like, I'm not religious, but I need a priest.
Yeah.
Anything. She's, I've tried everything.
Mm-hmm.
And she's at her absolute wit's end, and she's just a broken person. And at the end, um, it's heartbreaking too with the priest, basically finding his own faith or faith in himself, um,
Yeah.
but in the worst way possible. And it's just that whole, and I guess that scene too of the demon just kind of laughing. It's just
Oh,
an example of just pure evil, just, laughing at suffering. And it's just absolutely relentless. There's really no humor that is an escape, because a lot of other movies, there's like kind of a moment of
a
like, oh,
breakup.
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Exorcist doesn't have that. And if it does, I'm not recalling it.
No, it's pretty,
Um,
once it starts, it goes until it stops.
yes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really just a terrifying film.
Mhm.
And one of the things I really love watching are reaction um, um, videos to different either music videos or movies
Yeah,
or sitcoms, because it's fun to watch people discover things.
it
But I
is.
saw,
Yeah.
I was able to find footage of when The Exorcist came out. And remember talking to my parents about it, and they said, oh, it was this whole thing. Like people were going crazy over it. And they were saying that the film itself was cursed. But I found this footage of audience members after The Exorcist. Like
Mhm.
people were just kind of laying in the lobby, like face down, just like, and there's people just kind of standing around in shock. I'm like, I can't even fathom going to see that on the big screen the first time, not knowing what I was going into, just knowing it was going to be a horror film about possession, like, okay. And then to be assaulted with those images and those noises, absolutely terrifying. I'm like,
Yeah.
no wonder they were kind of walking around in a stupor afterwards. But so it
Yeah.
still is just a horrifying film. And I don't think that it's ever going to diminish in its power over audiences, which is really, again, it's saying something, because it's an old film.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is just absolutely, it's unrelenting. It really, and it builds very quickly too. And it
Yeah.
just adds and adds and adds. So it kind of puts you through the emotional ringer as well. So it's really just that it gets you on all these levels: metaphysical, emotional, core
Mhm.
level, and then you're feeling for this poor girl. The scene
Yeah.
where the friend, she's like showing the priest that help me is scratched on her stomach, is just like, oh God. So it's like the body horror, it's everything. But it does it in such a way that is just so visceral. It's just so
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah, and thinking about, obviously when it came out, there wasn't anything like this. Like this wasn't, but now we've seen not things I would say that are the exact same, but we've seen so much since then. Like
Yeah,
there have been so
yeah,
many movies that have pushed so many limits and stuff. And this at the time that this came out, considering the themes, considering all of the stuff that's involved in the film is very would be very shocking. I mean, and it would be hard to do that now, but it just for the time frame specifically, like they weren't used to that being what a horror movie really was. Like, I mean, you had some things that had moments, and you've got some stuff from before that that was pretty rough, but this was like in your home. This was your kid,
yeah.
this was your belief system, your everyday life. Like